The city where I'm going now has always been special. Originally born as a free city of the Hanseatic League and later repeatedly passing from hand to hand, it was the largest city of the Swedish Empire, then Polish, then Russian, and then independent. And yet it has always been very different from the rest of the country, even when it was a part of it. Now it's a capital of an independent state, but nevertheless it still brings back a lot of memories, just blowing up my brain with names, titles, and emotions. And I actually think it's precisely this ambiguity that makes it so attractive. It's both foreign and local, old and modern, coldly serious and jokingly friendly, and all these epithets are about the same place: the free Hanseatic city, the capital of Latvia, Riga. Let's go! I was so eager to walk around Riga that on the very first evening, when all normal people supposedly had to go to sleep, I sneaked outside and just went to wander through the darkness. Just look, isn't Riga beautiful at night? Finally, as a true water lover, I came to the town hall square and the embankment. And that's precisely where I got the feeling that I am inside my childhood dream. I have always heard all these names, but they have always been something very distant and inaccessible. And now, here is the town hall square, here's Daugava, somewhere there ahead is Jūrmala. Even now, when I say this, my heart skips a beat, and then on the bridge, it nearly jumped out. The other day, when I finally had a chance to see Riga in daylight, I of course had a plan. Riga in general is quite small, and there wasn't enough time for everything. But I did manage to do something, squeeze everything into a few very intense hours. Let's start with the city market. I did not plan to buy anything, I was more interested in the architecture. The fact is that Riga has one of the largest covered markets of the Northern Europe. And one of the reasons for this is that the market is made of the hangars in which they once used to store Zeppelins, which bombed Riga during the First World War. 5 hangars were brought from Vainoda, which is about 190 kilometers away from Riga, and their top parts were used to build 5 pavilions of the market, each having its own specialization, from a separate meat pavilion to the fish and pastry pavilions, which are connected by a walkthrough. So, if you are impressed by a truly cyclopean scale of the buildings, then the market is definitely worth a look, even if you do not intend to buy anything there. Just 10 minutes away from the market is the Church of St. Peter. Originally built in the 13th century, it was the tallest building in Riga for a long time, 123.5 meters, of which more than a half is the speciality of the church, and actually of the whole of Riga, the spire. It was so until the Riga TV tower was completed in the end of 1980s and St. Peter's Church ceased to be the high champion. The spire of the church is decorated by a classic weather vane with a cockerel, which, among other things, also indicated whether the merchant ships could enter the port for trading. There are 2 viewpoints on the church, at a height of 51 and 71 meters, but, I prefer to look at cities from a human, not from a bird's point of view, so I didn't go up there. The church itself was seriously damaged during the battles for Riga and fascist occupation in 1941, so therefore the original interiors did not survive. But some artifacts are stored inside now. For example, the original statue of Roland from the Town Hall Square. And if you have a very good eyesight, then check the clock on the tower. It only has one hand, because at the time the mechanisms with two hands still did not exist, and a very unusual number 4. Historic city center, Old Riga or Vecriga, is formed by a number of amazing cozy little streets, atmospheric houses and squares. One of them is the so-called Livu Square, which is bound by guild buildings, theater of Mikhail Chekhov. Mikhail is actually the nephew of Anton Chekhov we all know about, and the famous cat house. If you look up, then 2 cats are clearly visible on the roof of the house, in a very strange but perfectly understandable poses. According to the urban legend, some merchant really wanted to join the big guild. The local one, not the Blackheads, which we will talk about a little later. But for some reason he was not accepted there. And then he made a natural démarche. He installed these cats on the roof of his tenement house, turning their, well, let's say, backs towards the office of the head of the big guild. The latter naturally demanded to remove the cats. The merchant obviously refused. All in all, of course, in the end the merchant was accepted into the guild, and the cats were turned into a more reputable and acceptable direction. As for the Livu Square itself, it was actually here, along one of the streets that form it, where the outflow of the Daugava, the Riga River, was once flowing. The river which actually gave the name to the city, but later destroyed and filled up as unnecessary. And if you're lucky and can see the lawn in the middle of the Livu Square, then you will definitely see some wavy decorations on it, which actually represent the old Riga River. If you go towards the still existing river, then in a few minutes you, just like me, will find yourself in the Town Hall Square. I must say that in my deep childhood, I first heard the term town hall in relation to Tallinn or actually Riga. Well, here it is finally, in front of me. But actually the town hall itself is not very interesting, but next to it stands the so-called House of the Blackheads, which is a lot more exciting. Blackheads is not a surname. This was a guild of single merchants who traded outside Riga, unlike the so-called Big Guild, whose merchants were engaged in trade within Riga or with its suburbs, which was obviously a lot safer. An intricate name, Blackheads, appeared because the merchants of the guild considered Saint Mauritius as their patron, who, for some unknown reason, often, but not always though, was portrayed as black. The building itself was constructed by the so-called Small Guild in the 14th century, and since the 15th century, it has been rented by the Blackheads. Unfortunately, the original guild building was lost during World War II and completely rebuilt in 1999. Only the cellars now remain from the original building. In front of the building, there is a place where some 500 years ago the first Christmas tree in Riga was installed. And a little further, there is another symbol of Riga, the statue of Roland, which is symbolizing the fair trade and the freedom of Riga. By the way, this is a copy of the original statue, because the old one fell into disrepair and was moved into the Church of St. Peter, which we have already visited. And a copy was installed in the square in 2005. The gloomy long building across the square on the way to the quayside is the Museum of Occupation now. The creators of the museum believe that there were 3 periods of occupation in the history of Latvia. The first one in 1940 to 41 by Soviet Union, the second in 1941 to 44 by Nazi Germany, and the third one after 1944 till 1991 by the USSR again. But before becoming the Museum of the Occupation, it was the Museum of the Latvian Red Riflemen, actually one of the best units of the Red Army, formed from parts of the Latvian army who supported the Bolsheviks in 1917. It is actually them that the moment standing between the museum and the embankment shows. Of course, it's quite difficult and a very sensitive topic for Latvia now, and it is fully illustrated by such a set of cars which are parked right next to the museum. But let's move on to another part of the history of Riga, something brighter. As I have already said, Riga has always looked more European than most of the USSR, so it is not surprising at all that it was here where a lot of movies were filmed whose action supposedly took place somewhere in Western Europe. Riga played London, Paris, and even Bern. I would really love to talk about this, but I actually suspect that most of my English-speaking audience is simply not familiar with the movies I'm going to talk about. So if you really want to check it, there will be a link to another version of this video on screen and in the description. There are English subtitles there, and you can scroll to 10 minutes 20 to check it. And for now, here's just another piece of lovely Riga. One of the non-cinematic attractions of the Jaunjēla Street is the palace of King Peter the Great, who stayed there 7 or 8 times during his visits to Riga. It is now massively rebuilt and converted into a residential house, and I think it's actually quite amazing to live there, although I'm quite sure there is nothing left inside. Walking further, I saw the Riga Castle, but honestly speaking, I did not go there. First of all, because this is the official residence of the president and not a museum, and it seems that just going there is not allowed. And secondly, well, honestly, no, it's not very impressive, especially from the outside. I'm sorry, but it looks like a bunch of some separate buildings unrelated to each other. But outside, there was suddenly such a startling place in a real basement which I simply could not miss. Instead of the castle, I actually visited the Riga Cathedral, which is currently undergoing renovation. It is one of the oldest churches in Riga, and for some time it was the tallest building in the city, even higher than the Church of St. Peter. But its spire was wooden and naturally constantly required care, so it was finally replaced in 1766 by a smaller one, but also with a weather vane with a cockerel at the top. And what's interesting, part of the ensemble of the cathedral is now the Museum of the History of Riga and Navigation. Unfortunately, this time I did not have enough time for it, so I will really appreciate it if you tell me if it's worth going there next time. On your way from the Riga Cathedral, you will surely stumble upon the 3 strange houses, propping each other up. These are the so-called 3 brothers, most likely a reference to the 3 sisters in Tallinn, or maybe to the previous Riga age record holder, a house which had an anaglyph depicting 3 men above the entrance. But whatever is the reason behind, now these are the oldest stone residential buildings in Riga. The first and the oldest building was built around 1490, and it seems to be one of the first residential stone houses built in Riga, after the fear of fires made the council forbid to build from wood. The middle brother is about 150 years younger and built around 1646. It resembles Dutch houses with large windows, which among other things indicate the wealth of the owners. Well, the green brother is the youngest. It was built at the end of the 17th century. Only the 2 older brothers attracted interest for quite a long time, so by 1901 only they were carefully inspected, drawn and measured. It was only decided to save the youngest brother as well during the preparation for a full-fledged restoration in 1957. At that moment, it turned out that from all three buildings, it's the youngest brother that has undergone a major overhaul. But fortunately, it has not yet been demolished at the point. So now, these three buildings show how Riga urban development changed over time. This can be easily traced by where the owners lived. Just have a look. The oldest house has the largest windows on the ground floor. That's where the owners stayed. Above them were some auxiliary premises such as warehouses, workshops and so on, anything that does not require much heating. The middle brother has medium-sized windows on the ground floor because now it's the servants who lived here. The owners lived on the first floor, and yet above them there still were some workshops and warehouses. By the time the youngest brother was built, all workshops have already been taken out of Riga, so the youngest brother is fully residential. Frankly speaking, visiting the churches in Riga is not very fascinating. The simple reason for that is most of them were badly damaged during the war, and therefore nothing is now left from the original interiors. So I promise this is going to be the last. But this one is the Cathedral of St. James, another beautiful example of medieval Riga architecture. It should be mentioned, however, that initially it was not conceived as a cathedral, because by this time the original Riga Cathedral has already been built. In addition, the church was located outside the city limits, which is why it received an unofficial title of the most famous rural church in Riga. It was only in 1262 when the church and its surroundings finally became part of the city. In addition, the cathedral changed confessions several times and accordingly was seriously rebuilt inside. And that's also why there's not much of interest left. But it was here in 1819 where the abolition of serfdom throughout all Livonia was announced. Down a narrow street behind the Cathedral of St. James, you can come to a house with a huge amount of wall revelations. Frankly speaking, there is little artistry here, but the truth of life is clearly visible, as well as the ups and downs of some relationships and generally the attitude to some modern events. A little further, you can see the last surviving city gates of Riga. There were actually 8 of them, but only one survived to this day, the so-called Swedish Gate. The gate was cut at the end of the 17th century right through the wall of a residential building. And according to the urban legend, it was made by a merchant who simply did not want to pay the tax to enter the city. But, well, to be honest, this version is very doubtful, because to keep the gates in a city wall a secret would be, well, at least very, very difficult. Most likely, the gate was simply used for the access of the Swedish soldiers to the barracks, which are located right outside the gate. And another urban legend is about a girl who was walled up here because she was apparently caught on a non-authorized date with one of those Swedish soldiers. But to be honest, this is also pretty hard to believe. The round powder tower is the last remaining of the 28 towers of the original Riga fortress. It was originally called Sand Tower, most likely because of the dunes from the Riga River flowing past it. But around the 17th century it was renamed and became the Powder Tower, possibly due to the fact that there was a storehouse of gunpowder inside, which frankly sounds a little strange and even dangerous for the building at the forefront of the defense. The tower really participated in a number of conflicts, and it's illustrated by the cannonballs in its wall. Contrary to the urban legend and the popular belief, they did not get stuck there. They were built in on purpose to commemorate the Northern War. The tower was not demolished with the others. By the order of the Governor-General of Riga Suvorov, the grandson of Alexander Suvorov, it was left for history. After that, the tower stood abandoned for a long time until in 1892 the student body has restored it. And it's funny that the students collected part of the money for the restoration by just cleaning the tower and selling the collected pigeon droppings for fertilizer. At the very end of my trip, I suddenly had another luck. I managed to carve out a couple more free hours, so I decided to hit the road to Jurmala. I was actually running out of time, and therefore I preferred the severity of the Black Sea to the architecture and the Gentry Hall. It is cold, a bit harsh, but astonishingly beautiful. And this is about all that I managed to see in Riga this time. It is probably not too much, but you always have to leave something for the future. The touristic Riga made a pretty good impression on me. Living there for a long time is probably quite a different experience, but as for me, personally I was really lucky to meet very nice and friendly Latvians. I never ever felt any tension or negative feelings toward myself, which to be honest I was a little afraid of. Surely Riga has some problems and difficulties which I as a tourist simply did not notice. There are some maybe not very nice people there and strange places, but in general, if you behave and focus on the positive side, then Riga is definitely one of the places which I can confidently recommend. What else can I add here? Except maybe for
Uz tikšanos, Rīgā!